Somebody's playing games with my songbook. The print is much smaller than I remember it being. I had to pull out the spectacles to see, just to be able to follow along and get the words mostly right. Mostly. I can still mess up even when I can see them. It's kind of bizarre. Good evening. How are y'all today? I'm thankful for air conditioning. I started just to mention it specifically in my prayer, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to talk about it for a minute. I'm thankful for air conditioning. I don't know how folks lived 100 years ago without it. I guess they were used to it. Maybe it wasn't as hot back then. I don't know. But what's that? Wasn't no 100 years ago. I was just trying to make sure I reached back there far enough. I am a frigid air generation. I like air conditioning. I really do. I'm not sure how to did a little bit of work today, and just in and out and in and out. I kept fogging up every time I'd come in and out. About 120% humidity over there around Perrytown, and it was an interesting day, just from a climate perspective. But anyway, I'm glad to be here. It's nice. It's cool. And we get to spend a few minutes, this is a really short chapter, just a few minutes here in chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. David is on his way to the throne. He's already king, sort of. You know, in our language, he's recognized as ruler in pretty much the southern region of the landmass of Israel. The northern part still, for the most part, is faithful or have their allegiance to Ishbosheth. Abner, the general of Ishbosheth, had defected. He had went and talked to the tribe of Benjamin. He talked to others to try to sway them to follow David. Abner then was killed by Joab, assassinated. And so that's kind of where we pick up here in chapter 4. We have Ishbosheth now without his general. David, you know, is just gaining strength and popularity daily. So his influence in Israel is just steadily growing. Ishbosheth's kingdom, as it were, steadily shrinking. So that's where we're going to pick up here in chapter 4. When Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. And now Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, sons of Ramon, a man of Benjamin from Beroth. For Beroth also is counted part of Benjamin. This is a good place for an aside. Well, let's first talk about Saul's son here. We have Ishbosheth, found out that Abner had died. His courage failed. This is bad news. Abner's his general. Abner, you know, pretty much ran things, right? He was the power behind the throne, as it were, for Ishbosheth. So, big step backwards here for Ishbosheth. You know, this is not a good thing. All right, now back to what I was going to say. This is kind of an aside. These names, we just guess kind of about how these are said. Now, Hebrew scholars, they can look at the Hebrew and get pretty good, right? Here we're looking at an English translation where translators are trying to make Hebrew sounds with English letters. It's not always possible. Take here in verse 2, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth line down, B-A-A-N-A-H. Typically in Hebrew, when you see in the English the 2 A's side by side like that, it's a very guttural and pause sound. It should be said something similar to Ba'na, right? I'm not going to read it like that. My throat doesn't function very well. I can't just read and keep going. So I'll say ba'ana or something like that. I'll throw a pause in it. I've heard people say banana. I've heard people say bana. I mean, you can say bina, bena, and bene. I mean, you hear all sorts of pronunciations. The point I'm getting to is if you find yourself reading from God's Word publicly, such as I am right now, or any time, really, even in you're just sitting at home reading in your head, and it's usually going to be in the Old Testament more so than the New, you're going to come across names that just look impossible. Just stay with your fundamental understanding of English pronunciation and read that thing with confidence. Somebody comes up here and does a scripture reading and they just take off reading, they read it with confidence. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of one was Baanah, the name of the other was Rechab, the sons of Rimmon, the men of Benjamin from Beeroth. For Beeroth is also counted as Benjamin. Say it with confidence. And everybody out there will say, you know what, maybe I was saying that wrong. He said that like he knew what he was talking about. You know, just read it with confidence. If you pause and stumble through it, you just kind of draw attention to yourself. Just say it like you know what you're talking about. Nobody's going to know any better. And the fact is, you may be right because we're just not sure about a lot of these sounds that we make. So we just do the best we can. So we just read through there strong. We do it strong. All right, so Abner's general's dead. He's found out. His strength, his courage has failed. He knows that it's bad, right? His general, his protector, his muscle is gone, right? So now we have these two guys, Baanah and Rechab. They're coming into the story. And now, here's verse 3. The Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there to this day. So we have a little bit of an aside. Verse 4 is somewhat of an anomaly. And I say that because what we see in it really does not fit with the rest of the chapter. Let me read it. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Again, that's been said a lot of different ways, emphasis put on different syllables and whatnot. But this verse, logistically speaking, does not fit in the chapter. We're talking about these two men of the tribe of Benjamin. And as soon as we finish verse 4, we're going to turn right around and go back to them. We're not going to talk about Mephibosheth anymore. We're not going to talk about Jonathan anymore this chapter. It's seemingly out of the blue. And I say this because I don't know what your study Bible may say. It may not say anything or mention it at all. But when you get to really digging in, studying any passage of the Old Testament, New Testament, you're going to come across something labeled as a textual variant, which means different manuscripts may not have this verse in it, or it is changed significantly from one ancient manuscript to the other. Some will argue that this verse doesn't belong, that it should be either left out or it was supposed to have been somewhere else, and we'll call it a scribal error. But nevertheless, you may see the phrase textual variant pop up in your studies, and that's simply all it means, that somebody somewhere is disputing the veracity of the passage, whether it belongs or not. So I would point out that it seems to be incongruent with the text around it. In context, this is information we don't need for the passage, but there is a little bit of information here that we could say is beneficial to understanding what's happening in the grand scheme of things, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. All right, pressing on into verse 5. Now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. They came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. And then Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. And when they came into the house, as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. They took his head and went by the way of the Arabah all night. Okay, so now these two guys that we started the chapter with, they have done this We're just going to call it what it is, an assassination. All right, they are part of his raiding, generals of his raiding parties, generals, commanders of his raiding parties, and they are coming under the guise of getting their rations for their parties. That would have been normal. Noonday nap, also very normal. All that's right in place. It's a little bit bizarre that we don't hear of a guard or something like that, and that perhaps is a void that was left by Abner. So we have these two guys assassinating the king of Israel. They behead him, and then they take his head and run through the wilderness with it, escape through the wilderness. I tried to put a map in here to show kind of the general area of where we're talking about, but my program hung up on me and wouldn't let it transfer, so I wasn't able to get the map. They are in what we would call the Transjordan. They're in Gilead. So their escape route that they're taking is bringing them back into the Jordan River Valley and the wilderness. I would say the wilderness of Nain, that direction. Araba just simply means, it can mean desert, it can be wilderness. What it means is going through an uninhabited area. It's they're going through villages. They're not going from town to town. They're going into wilderness areas. So they're fleeing is what they're doing, but they're on their way somewhere. In verse 8, they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. And they said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord, the king, this day on Saul and on his offspring." All right, let me get y'all's take on this, because we know, studying chapter 1, after the death of Saul, that there was some young man who thought it was a wise idea to tell David that Saul asked him to take his life when he was mortally wounded, and that he did. And it was a lie, because he didn't. He just thought he would find some favor. He brought back Paul's armlet, and he was going to bring that to David as proof of death. You remember what David did to that guy? Had him killed. More or less, how dare you presume to take the life of the Lord's anointed? And now we have these two guys who assassinate Ishbosheth, bring his head to David at Hebron, and act as if they've done David a favor. And you guys read ahead, you know what's coming. Can you guess what's about to happen? It's not going to be good. These guys are not achieving what they thought they might achieve. Now here's the thing. There's some Hittite records. We're talking about the same area, same time frame, where there's a record of a general going in and assassinating a king's would-be rival and bringing his head back to him and receiving great rewards. It would seem as if that might be on these guys' mind. They're going to go assassinate Ishbosheth. They're going to bring his head to David, and he's going to be tickled. He's going to be king over all Israel, and he's just going to shower them with blessings and wealth, or maybe a seat at his table. They don't know David very well. I'm going to argue that since David was loaded up in anger and was about to go kill the whole household of Nabal, and Abigail stopped him on his way and pleaded with him. She talked some sense to him. Since then, David has made pretty sound decisions, and he said some very wise things that younger David wouldn't. David's beginning to recognize blood guilt. When Joab assassinated Abner, he didn't kill Joab. He pronounced a curse over him. He lamented Abner. He went through this great period of grief. And He's said and done some pretty smart things. It's really advanced him in the kingdom and in the eyes of the people of Israel. Now we want to see how he reacts to Ishbosheth's assassination. David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite. I don't know why our author thought he had to repeat who they were each and every time. Son of Rimmon. Anyway, that's interesting. Makes me have to say it again and again. All right, David's response here in verse 9. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. When one told me, behold, Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. Now David starts off here. Now I just listen to the faith of David. This is before his blood starting to curdle, but listen to what he says. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. I'd say that's one of the greatest statements of faith in the Old Testament. David knows whom he leans on for his life and everything that is in it, his station, where he is as heir apparent to the throne, the anointed one. His faith, his hope is in the Lord, and he makes that very much known. We don't see that in anybody else. All right? But then his statement here in verse 10, behold, Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news. I seized him and killed him at Ziklag. These two guys right about this point are starting to look at one another, aren't they? What'd you get me into? Uh-oh. David follows that up with, there in the last clause, which was the reward I gave him for his news, which kind of helps us anticipate and kind of put together. These guys probably did this expecting David to reward them greatly. This is not what they expected to hear when they showed up at Hebron with Ishbosheth's head. They were far from this in their thinking. Verse 11, how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed? Shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. They messed up. They did not know David, did they? They thought he would react like the other kings, like the other rulers that they've heard about, that perhaps they've encountered. That is not what's happened. Now think for a moment, politically speaking. They did eliminate David's political adversary. That's not how David views Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth is the Lord's anointed. He's the heir to the throne, right? By birth, he is Saul's son. Now, there is no established lineage thing. Saul was the first king, but we know from studying the history of the monarchy in Israel, firstborn son to firstborn son. When that firstborn son is still alive and hasn't been assassinated himself, then it may go to the second, thirdborn, fourthborn son, maybe even an uncle. David recognizes Ishbosheth and his rightful position. Even calls him a righteous man. David is not, he's not a, you ever heard the phrase, the ends justifies the means? It's usually used in a moral justification type sense. I'm going to do this bad thing because the result of it is a good thing. I've heard folks use it for all sorts of accidents they've had. They did something that was terribly, for lack of a better word, stupid. And then eventually something good worked out because of their boneheaded action. And so they go back and they bless the whole thing because something good came out of it way down here down the line. The ends does not justify the means in a moral situation. It is not a good argument. I'm always going to argue against the ends justifies the means in most situations when the means requires sin. All right? If the means require sin, then we're going about it the wrong way to justify our ends. All right. So here in chapter 4, we have a new, we're not going to call it a power vacuum because I don't believe it to be a power vacuum so much as the actions of these two assassins has placed Israel in a position to be loyal to David legally, where they can now look at David as king. Yes, Samuel anointed him way back when he was a little boy at his daddy's house. But now Saul is gone and not by David's hand. His sons, Jonathan, also died by the hands of the Philistines. Ishbosheth, the next one in line for the throne because all the other sons had been killed, is gone at the hands of assassins. David has incurred no blood guilt, which is the reason he did not continue on to Nabal's house. All right, now let's go back to verse 4. The only connection in this passage to Mephibosheth is this. He would have been the last heir, right? Jonathan's son. Upon Ishbosheth's death, Mephibosheth is the only heir of Saul, except he's lame. You can't have a lame king. Your king has to be a symbol of power, of authority, right? He's got to be a leader, a general. And you can't be that in this day and time if you're lame. So they can argue about whether it belongs in the text or not, but what the author accomplishes is he lets us know that there's nobody else in Saul's lineage that can ascend to the throne. All right, you have any thoughts, any questions about chapter 4 here in 2 Samuel? Pretty short chapter, but serves a pretty great purpose. It's getting us to David and his throne. And we're not too far from David being anointed king of all Israel, not too far from Jerusalem. Jerusalem's still under control of the Jebusites. The capital city for David right now is Hebron. And so we're not too far from Jerusalem and Jebusites and the water shaft and David being anointed king and all that.
I think, it mentions, I pronounce it
Mephibosheth? Suits me.
We told about him here, and if I'm not mistaken, later on, there's going to be a search for any descendants left of Saul.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they find out about
Mephibosheth.
And he comes and he just eats at David's table.
Right. Those are the two places he's mentioned in Scripture.
It's as if David don't even know he exists. The way it's inserted in there.
Right. That's the way it seems when it's brought up. I'm trying to remember now. I just read it this morning where that takes place. It seems like it's in Chronicles, right? Sir?
Also brought up in chapter
chapter 9.
Now, David commands that these two men be killed for what they did to Ishbosheth.
Yeah.
But do you think he also commanded that their feet and hands be cut off? Or this was doing to the young men?
I don't see the young men doing this kind of thing without his authority, because that would be them biting off quite a bit of authority for themselves. I see it more as David distancing. Well, one, he's genuinely upset. He was genuinely upset about Joab assassinating Abner. The situation is different because Abner killed Joab's brother. So while David wasn't happy about it, he didn't necessarily have grounds to have Joab killed. Here, these are two assassins who have murdered. So by law, they deserve death. The hands and feet being cut off and hang by the pool of Hebron can serve a couple purposes. One, they still had a lot of sketchy Canaanite beliefs in them at this time. They've been there a pretty good while now, and they believed a lot of different things about what happens in the afterlife, and one of those things involved having your body intact. And two, this becomes a pretty big warning sign, from David, or I say it a warning, a cautionary tale. You might not better act out on your own thinking you're helping the king, such like this. If you're going to go try to assassinate a political adversary for David, you might better rethink it. You might want to not do that. Come visit with him about it first, maybe. But anyway, so it does serve a purpose. It is a warning, and it is a pretty strong one. Pretty strong one. All right, well, we'll get into chapter 5, which is a bigger chapter, a little bit longer chapter next week. A lot going on. All right. There we have it.